Hello, hockey fans, and welcome as we continue our look at the great career of the one and only Guy Lafleur. If you haven't checked out part 1, do so now. The link is in the description and also in the top corner of the video. We are picking this one up from the 1979-80 season. At this point, Guy Lafleur is about to enter his 9th NHL season. But to quickly sum up where he is at this point, he has won 2 Hart trophies as league MVP, 3 Pearson trophies as a player's choice for MVP, 3 scoring titles, Canada Cup, and 5 Stanley Cups as the Habs enter the season as 4-time defending Stanley Cup champions. He's also the consummate trophy winner for playoff MVP in 1977. Going into this season, he has been a first-team All-Star 5 straight times and won the Molson Cup also 5 straight times as the team's top point getter in 3-star selections. He has captured the imagination of fans all over Montreal and across the nation and in the National Hockey League. He's the league's biggest star at this point, with several endorsements, has become a bona fide celebrity. His unique finesse, skill, grace, and playmaking style are matched by his sportsmanship and determination to win. Lafleur was the proud poster boy of the NHL. But the 4-time defending Stanley Cup champion Habs were facing a few obstacles going into a new decade. Yvan Cournoyer, a 16-year veteran and team's captain, only played 15 games a year prior due to severe back injuries and was forced into retirement. Serge Savard, who was the interim captain in the Roadrunners' absence, was now named the team's permanent captain. Also in a shocking turn of events, goaltender Ken Dryden retired at the age of 31 to pursue a permanent career in law. And the move that would definitely seem to affect Lafleur directly, his line mate Jacques Lemaire left the NHL after 13 seasons to play in Europe and also coach. But the biggest blow, Scotty Bowman, the guiding force behind the bench, the team's coach for 8 seasons, winning 5 Stanley Cups. His first year was Lafleur's first year. After being passed up for the general manager job after Sam Pollock retired, decided to take the coach GM job with the Buffalo Sabres. The new coach of the Habs would be Bernie Boom Boom Geoffrion, an icon in Montreal as a player and a Hall of Famer. And the media somewhat panned this choice, and this time they had good reason. Bernie had coaching experience as he coached the Rangers briefly in the late 60s, but resigned due to health problems. He then coached the Atlanta Flames during their first 3 seasons in existence, and did manage to get them into the playoffs by their 2nd season, but he left again due to health problems. He worked as a color commentator for the Flames until the end of the 1978-79 season, and got this job. But his health was still a question, and the fact that he hasn't coached in a long time, and also the fact that he's in a large media market, which he is familiar with but hasn't been a part of for many, many years now, many saw this as a publicity move more than a good move. Lafleur found himself in the role that he was on the opposite end of when he entered the NHL, the veteran who has to help the young players along, like the Mahovlich brothers or Henry Richard did for him. Pierre Mondu was a promising up-and-comer who gelled well with Lafleur in the prior season when Gaines Lemaire was injured. Also, Mark Napier seemed to have a huge upside to him, with pro experience in the WHA. Pierre LaRouche, a star forward and former 50-goal and 100-point scorer in Pittsburgh, came over in the Pete Mahovlich trade, but was battling injuries and inconsistent play, and found himself to be a healthy scratch quite often to boot. But many of the key elements that made the Habs a success up front were still there, especially star winger Steve Shutt. You also had Réjean Houle, Yvon Lambert, Mario Tremblay, Doug Risebrough, a superb face-off man and defensive forward in Doug Jarvis, and yes, the best defensive forward in the game, Bob Gainey. And speaking of defense, Savard, Lapointe, and Robinson, they were all still there. And while Robinson was only 28 years old at the time and still at the top of his game, the others were starting to get a little older. But that's okay because you had promising youngsters in Rod Langway and Brian Engblom. But how about goaltending? Well, that seems to be the biggest question mark. Dryden is gone, however, Michel Bunny Larocque had performed very well as a backup for many years. But can he be the #1 guy? They also acquired Denny Herron from the Pittsburgh Penguins, who has shown he can be an excellent goaltender, but at least has now a reliable defense in front of him. And they also had a rookie, good prospect, Richard Sevigny, on standby. This was a preseason where the experts had trouble picking cup winners because of all the changes Montreal made. Nobody was sure if they could make the drive for 5, which would tie the NHL record set by the old Habs from 1956 to 1960. The Bruins had parted ways with Don Cherry, but were still a strong team, and many felt their chance, however, had passed them by. Same for the New York Islanders, who kept collapsing in the playoffs. But now the Sabres look great on paper. So did the Flyers once again returning to contendership. And the whole structure of the league had changed. The WHA had ceased operations. Many players returned to the NHL, and 4 entire teams came into the league as well. The Edmonton Oilers, the Hartford Whalers, Winnipeg Jets, and Quebec Nordiques. A large expansion is always a game changer in sports, even if none of them are championship contenders. But with new teams, of course, not only comes old players returning, but new players arriving. So here we go, a new era, as the four-time defending Cup champions face a whole new situation, and our hero now faces a whole new pressure. Well, he didn't lose a step as the season began. Not one, not two, not even three, but 4 consecutive 3-point games. In the month of October, Lafleur was looking like his usual self, 19 points in 10 games. And the Habs would look good too, 6-2-2. He had another 3-point night to kick off November, where in 14 games he had 22 points that entire month. Any concern about Guy had definitely subsided, and in December he still looked sharp, with back-to-back 3-point nights. And he was gelling well once again with Steve Shutt, and both Pierres, Mondu, and LaRouche to boot. The Habs, however, were looking pretty good after 30 games, 15-9-6, nothing to sneeze at, but not what we're used to. And Bernie Jeffrey also seemed to be crumbling under the pressure of the vicious Montreal media, but again cited health problems as a reason why, just after 30 games, he departed the team. He'd never coach again in the NHL. However, to take over was Claude Ruel, a former coach in the late 60s who excelled in his role of director of player development during the 1970s, and he would take over as the head coach. But he'd lose his first 4 games as coach, bringing the Habs to their largest losing streak in over a decade. 6 losses in a row. By the midway point of this season, the Habs were not looking the best, 18-6, 16-6, and were being written off. However, our hero had the biggest start of his career. I'm not kidding. 70 points in 40 games. That's more than half a point. That's more than a easy for me to say. More than a point and a half a game. And yet he still wasn't in the leading scoring. Fellow 1971 draft alumnus Marcel Dion was first with 75. I should also mention that there was an 18-year-old phenom starting to make waves for expansion Edmonton. His name was Wayne Gretzky. In their first showdown back on December 14th, Ruel's first game back as head coach, the Oilers won 5-3. Gretzky had a goal and an assist and was a +2, while our hero just had an assist and was a -1. Their second showdown came on January 7, 1980. This time Lafleur took the kid to school as the Habs triumphed 4-3. Our hero assisted on Pierre LaRouche's game winner with 1:25 to play, and he had a goal and 2 assists for a 3-point night and a +1. Gretzky was pointless and had a -1. Starting with that win against the Oilers and going into the All-Star break, the Habs were looking like their old selves again, going 10-2-0, and our hero was averaging 2 points a game, with 11 goals, 13 assists, and 24 points. Some of the highlights in the stretch: 3-point night against Edmonton on January 16th. He had another against a heavily improved Chicago Blackhawks squad. The next at home against Toronto, 2 goals, 2 assists, and 4 points. 3 assists against expansion Hartford Whalers on January 24th, and another 3-point game in Vancouver on January 29th. And of course, Lafleur played in his 5th consecutive All-Star game. That's of course not counting the Challenge Cup from the year prior, which he did indeed play in. It wasn't as many Habs as we're used to seeing, but it was the Habs we are used to seeing playing in it, as Robinson was also playing his 5th game and Gainey in his 3rd. Lafleur had an assist in the 6-3 win for the Wales Conference. Lafleur and the Habs would continue to roll. In 4 games between February 9th and 16th, Lafleur had 11 points in 4 games. But then he played 2 back-to-back games that were less than stellar and was battling some injury issues around this time. Lafleur would miss 6 games, and the Habs would begin a 21-game unbeaten streak, and suddenly they were back to being a top-tier favorite to win the Cup. Looks like the drive for 5 was possible. Lafleur returned on March 6th in another showdown against Gretzky and the Oilers. He had an assist and was a +1, but Gretzky was on fire with 3 points and a +3, but Montreal would win the game 5-4. And they would each score a goal on March 15th, but the Habs would win 7-3. After Lafleur's return during the hot streak, he had 19 points in 13 games to end the season and was a +12. Lafleur, however, due to his injuries and since Dion and that teenage punk kid from Brantford being so red hot, he wasn't able to catch the scoring title, but like last season, finished 3rd and was far ahead of 4th place Gilbert Perreault despite missing 6 games. And he set an NHL record with his 6th consecutive 50-goal season, previously held by Phil Esposito. And his 6th consecutive 100-point season ties an NHL record held by the great Bobby Orr. He was still at the top of his game, while the Habs, despite a sluggish start, finished 47, 20, and 13 with 107 points, 3rd best record in the league, just 3 points behind the Sabres, who had 110, and also the Philadelphia Flyers, who had 116, who also broke the Habs' unbeaten streak record with 35 games. And the playoff format now changed due to expansion. 16 seeds and 4 rounds, including the Stanley Cup. No buys for the top team. The Habs' drive for 5 began in the preliminary round as the 3rd-place team. They faced the 14th-seeded team, the expansion Hartford Whalers, who were formerly known as the New England Whalers in the WHA and had great success. They crept into the playoffs with 73 points. And they had two top 10 league scorers in Mike Rogers and Blaine Stoughton. They also had the awesome Mark Howe playing both defense and up front. Speaking of defense, they had Al Sims and Gordie Roberts, two excellent talents. Plus, they had three NHL living legends, Bobby Hull, Dave Keon, and Mr. Hockey himself, Gordie Howe. The media experts and pundits, due to the Habs' hot streak, believe that, again, the drive for 5 was possible in the Stanley Cup win this year would truly be epic due to the circumstances behind it, and it would likely be the sweetest yet due to all the changes made, and that they could still thrive as champions. Well, Game 1 in Montreal, the Habs are a well-oiled machine. Everyone is working together, and it showed as the Habs decimated the Whalers 6-1. Lafleur assisted on a Brian Engblom goal early on, and they made it 4-0 when LaRouche to shut to Guy! Again, a 6-1 win. Game 2, much of the same. The Whalers were a little more aggressive, however, but Montreal wins 8-4. Lafleur has a goal, as Jarvis, Lambert, and Tremblay each had huge nights, and the best-of-5 series shifts to Hartford as the Habs go for a 3-game sweep. Game 3, the Habs trail 1-0 after a shorthanded goal by Pat Boutet, but Guy ties it, and probably seeing that he was upset by being upstaged, bitch Boutet laid a dirty hit on Lafleur, and all of Montreal likely gasped at once. He was very slow to get up and eventually needed to be helped to the locker room. It did not look good. However, the show goes on, and it's tied 3-3 at the end of regulation. But 29 seconds in, for the second year in a row, Yvon Lambert is an overtime hero and completes the sweep. Guy was looking good, but the prognosis going forward for these playoffs isn't good. He'll be out for action for the foreseeable future, and his return could depend on how far the Habs make it, if he can return in time for that. They may have to go for the drive for 5 without their biggest star. Well, the Habs had to move forward without the Flower, and they faced the underdog Minnesota North Stars, who made a dramatic turnaround from 68 points to 88 points, and their first winning record in 7 seasons. They had a great group of young up-and-coming talent. Up front, you had Bobby Smith, Steve Payne, Al McAdam, and Tim Young. On defense, they had one of the hottest young blue liners in the game, Craig Hartsburg. And joining him were Brad Maxwell and Greg Smith. And in net, you had veteran netminder Gilles Meloche. The Habs dropped Game 1 and 2, 4-1 and 3-0 at home. They have not dropped back-to-back games at home since the playoffs in 1966 in the Stanley Cup Finals, which they actually did end up winning. The media and the fans, well, they panicked. Lafleur was seen watching many games dressed in his suit, definitely eager to be on the ice. You could see it in his face. However, the next 3 games, Montreal took control of the series completely and dominated 5-0, 5-1, and 6-2. They could end it in Game 6 in Minnesota, but the Stars roar back and win 5-2. Game 7, the Habs are against the wall like they were against the Bruins last season. A do-or-die Game 7. The game was tied 2-2, and with 1:26 to play, Al McAdam scores a goal, and you could hear a pin drop in the forum. The Habs pressed, and everyone was on the edge of their seats. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The Habs dynasty was over. All Lafleur could do was watch as his team's reign at the top came to an end. A huge upset. And now there were questions abounding about his health going forward. The North Stars, however, would go on to lose to the Flyers in the semifinals, and the Flyers would lose to the New York Islanders in the Stanley Cup Finals. The Isles had finally reached the top at last. Well, the new centerman filling the top spot left for Lemaire was Pierre LaRouche, who, again, people were iffy on with good reason, but he had a huge comeback season. He assisted on 17 of Lafleur's 50 goals, and the two worked together one way or another to make 45 goals happen. And again, hey, here's Steve Shutt, still Lafleur's #1 guy. Out of Lafleur's 75 assists, a third of them, 25, were to Shutt, who had 47 goals, meaning the Flower assisted on more than half of them. And they had 11 assist collaborations and total combined to score for 46 goals. Unreal this line was. Lafleur also clicked amazingly still with Larry Robinson for a total of 29 goals, as Robinson won his second Norris Trophy as the league's top defenseman. Lafleur also worked well with Pierre Mondu whenever they were shifted together. For the first time since 1974-75, Lafleur was not a finalist for the Hart Trophy as league MVP, but still came in 4th in voting. And was once again a finalist for the Lady Byng, but again did not win it. However, his streak of first All-Star team selections continued, 6 in a row as the best right-winger in the league. While the Habs' reign on top ended, Lafleur's did not. Once again, he finished 3rd in scoring, was also 10th in plus-minus, tied for 8th in power play goals with 15. He was selected to his 6th consecutive first All-Star team award, won the team's Molson Cup for the 6th straight year as the team's top 3 stars point getter, tied for 6th with 7 game-winning goals, and also played in his 5th NHL All-Star game, was 4th in Hart Trophy voting, was a finalist for the Lady Byng Trophy to boot. And also, to add to that, set an NHL record previously held by Phil Esposito for his 6th consecutive 50-goal season, and tied Bobby Orr's record for 6 consecutive 100-point seasons. Whenever a professional athlete endures a major injury to the knee, it's always a cause for concern, and going into the NHL season and about to turn 29, many hope that Lafleur still had many good years left in him. Habs decided coach Claude Ruel will be the full-time coach, and some new talent was coming aboard, including Keith Acton, and the man who was selected first overall in the draft for the Montreal Canadiens in 1980, because even before he retired, Sam Pollock decided to play another team, the Colorado Rockies, for the fools they were, and drafted top prospect Doug Wickenheiser. As for our hero, he was approaching a milestone. Before the 1980-81 season, only 12 players have reached 1,000 career points, and 3 were approaching the mark going into the 1980-81 season. Lafleur and Dion were very likely to accomplish it, with the numbers that they put up every year. However, Bob Clarke of the Philadelphia Flyers, his scoring touch had somewhat diminished, but still had a chance to attain it this year as well. Also, 3 original 6 clubs, the Blackhawks, the Red Wings, and the Habs, each had 2 players who reached 1,000 points just wearing that one team's uniform. And Lafleur could become the first member of a team to have 3 1,000-point players all with the same team. However, Lafleur's injuries would cause him to miss the first 3 games of the season, and they went winless. Now, revisionist history will try to tell you this is where Lafleur was on a decline. Oh, really? Well, he plays his first game of the year on October 18th. He had a goal and an assist. 5 days later, he had a 3-point night against Chicago. Then a week later against the Hartford Whalers, Bitch Boutet is booed mercilessly by the Habs fans, and Lafleur gets revenge the best way he can, on the score sheet, scoring 2 goals and 3 assists for 5 points in a win. And then on November 12th, 1 goal, 4 assists for 5 points. Not exactly a sign of a player on the decline. Lafleur, however, would miss 7 games, bringing the season total to 11 so far in the season, and the Habs did not play well without him again. That being said, when Lafleur returned on December 6th, and in the next 8 games to December 23rd, he had just 5 points and was a -2. And yes, the media boo-birds were coming out flying, pointing out how he has slowed down and can't keep up now that the fact that his knee is not fully healed. Well, he rebounded into December 27th win over the Capitals with 4 assists. At the halfway point of the season, the Habs were 23-13-4, so they were still looking like a top-tier club, even if they didn't have the dominance they once had. Lafleur would miss 4 more games, and besides his knee and other physical ailments, he also had to deal with tonsillitis that year to boot. Yeesh. On January 10th, he returned, but then missed 5 games. But after returning on February 5th, he went on a tear. He was getting back to the flower of old, with 15 points, 11 games, and was a +6. On March 4th, 1981, the Habs hosted the worst team in pro hockey, the Winnipeg Jets, a team who had won 7 games all year at this point. But there was keen interest in it, however. Lafleur was at 997 career points. Marcel Dionne had just reached the 1,000-point mark earlier that year, and looked like Bobby Clarke was about to do it this year as well. The Habs were also on a 13-game unbeaten streak, and 4 minutes into the game, the crowd was glued more than usual. With Guy touching the puck, they are ready for him to reach the mark. And 4 minutes in, he assisted on a Pierre LaRouche goal. The Habs fans came unglued at the Montreal Forum. And then, just 4.5 minutes later, Lafleur scores a goal. It's 2-0 Habs. He's now at 999 points. In the game, the Habs led 8-0 after 2 periods. I told you the Jets were bad. And the crowd rose to their feet every time Guy touched the puck. But he was held off the score sheet after the second period. But the Habs wouldn't have to wait long. The puck was put in on goal by Keith Acton. And as it was loose, Lafleur picked it up, parked it past Michel Dion for career point number 1,000. A big game of 2 goals and an assist for 3 points to reach the milestone. And to top it off, he set an NHL record, reaching the mark in his 720th game. Marcel Dion had set the record earlier in the season, doing it in 740 games. And hey, look at that dapper young man applauding Lafleur behind him on the Montreal bench. No biggie, just a guy who would become one of the all-time greats. I don't know, I think his nickname was Magnificent or something like that? I don't know. A huge moment for the Flower, and what has been a trying year. And it should be smooth sailing from here, right? Right? Well, just over a week later, Lafleur had another 3-point night against the Blues. But in the late hours of March 24, 1981, after a night on the town, Lafleur fell asleep at the wheel and crashed his luxury rental car, and a pole went slicing right through the window, slicing part of Lafleur's ear. He was lucky that's all that happened. While Lafleur's primary focus was always the game itself, he liked to indulge in that Montreal nightlife, which I alluded to in my video about Expos player Gary Carter. He walked away with minor injuries, but did indeed need some minor plastic surgery to repair his ear. Lafleur would say later on that this was a wake-up call and he would cut back on the nightlife. And it didn't seem to affect his play all that much. He'd return and play 2 more regular season games and have 4 points in those 2 games. Overall, however, Lafleur missed 29 games that year, but still not 70 points. Despite being his lowest mark, he was still productive when healthy, but the seeds of doubt regarding his future had been planted. But he was ready come playoff time. The Habs finished 45, 22, and 13 for 103 points, the 3rd best record in the league. And they were facing a team laced with the best crop of young yet still green and maturing talent in the Edmonton Oilers. And it didn't look good for the youngsters, as they went with Andy Moganet, who only had 7 games of pro experience. But you had hungry up-and-coming defensemen such as Paul Coffey, Kevin Lowe, and they were led by veteran Lee Fogelin. Up front, let's see, Mark Messier, Glenn Anderson, Yari Kuria, and oh yes, that Gretzky guy, who set an NHL record for assists with 109 and points in a year for 164. Hey, this lineup, as impressive as it wasn't really a threat in 1981. As I said, a lot of these guys were still maturing, and even Gretzky had yet to hit his best years. This will certainly be a learning experience. They only had 74 points in the seasons, and we are set. Here we go. Game 1 in Montreal, and this Andy Moak kid is actually pretty good, but it's okay. I'm sure the Habs will be down 3-1 after the first period, and still down 3-1 after the second. Oh, hey, 3rd period comebacks are not gonna happen here. The Oilers take game 1 6-3. Moak stops 28 shots. Gretzky has 5 points. But okay. Playoff upsets are bound to happen in given games, but surely this is a stroke of playoff luck, right? And game 2, yeah, the Habs bombard Andy Moak, and he stops 40 out of 41 shots, and the Oilers win 3-1. Okay, guys, this isn't funny anymore. And our hero will no doubt step up in Edmonton. It's 3-0 in the second period. Come on. Oh, look, Lafleur has an assist. Look, the Habs only trail 3-1. And shut. Oh, he scores. It's 3-2. Okay, Oilers, get ready to win 6-2. An utterly atrocious outing from the Habs. The Oilers will have one of the biggest upsets in NHL history. And our hero was not very good. He had an assist and was a -3, by far the worst playoff performance of his career up to that point. And to be fair, he wasn't even close to being the worst on the team in that playoff round. The first time the Habs have gone a year without winning a playoff series since the 73-74 season. They were completely humiliated by a team they should have swept, and yeah, even just beaten. I know the Oilers had 6 future Hall of Famers on this team at this point, but this was beyond shocking. In the next round, they took the defending Stanley Cup champion New York Islanders to a certain limit, but lost in 6 games as the Isles would go on to win their 2nd straight cup a few weeks later. However, Lafleur's season wasn't done. He chose to represent Team Canada at the 1981 World Ice Hockey Championships in Sweden. It didn't get much better. Lafleur, despite going along with Larry Robinson, who himself had an atrocious outing in the Oilers series and might have even been the worst player, at least he had a good tournament. Robinson was actually named best defensive player and made the All-Star team for this tournament. Lafleur only scored a goal and took a brutal hit to the head during one game, and Canada finished out of the medal round, finishing 4th place. Lafleur, of course, was working hard with his top line, but LaRouche also battled injuries that year to boot. Shutt, however, assisted on a third of Lafleur's 27 goals, and Lafleur still assisted on 12 of the 35 goals that Shutt scored, just over a third. Lafleur also collaborated with 14 different players on assists, but LaRouche led the way with 9. Despite his many streaks coming to an end, he still managed to register a vote for the Hart Trophy, and was also 12th in Lady Byng Trophy voting. So unfortunately, his streak of first-team All-Star selections ends at 6. So does his NHL record of 6 consecutive 50-goal seasons, and he's unable to break Bobby Orr's record of 6 consecutive 100-point seasons, and settles for a tie with the 6. No All-Star Game selection, and even his streak of Molson Cups came to an end. Being that as it may, despite the injuries and despite a brush with death in his car accident, Lafleur still managed to score 70 points in 51 games. And despite his lowest total since the 73-74 season, he still had that spark, and he was 10th in points per game in the NHL. This year wasn't a complete wash. He became the fastest player in NHL history to reach 1,000 points, doing so in 720 games, and was also tied for 6th in game-winning goals, and finished with a very good +24. Despite everything, it's not fair to break the flower off quite yet. Thoughts on Lafleur were mixed going into the 1981-82 season. The injuries were a concern, And despite his poor playoff performance, he again wasn't even close to being one of the top 5 worst players in that entire series. But the Habs felt that they needed to make some changes. Claude Ruel stepped down as coach due to the playoff humiliation, but went back to his full-time role of director of player personnel. The Habs hired Bob Berry, coming off a season in the Los Angeles Kings, leading them to their best regular season ever. But another big departure was Serge Savard, who went to the Winnipeg Jets. After 14 seasons with the Habs, the new captain would be Bob Gainey, coming off winning the NHL's first 4 Selke trophies ever as the league's top defensive forward. The loss of Savard, as sad as it may have been for some, the Habs' defense corps was still led by Larry Robinson and was being bolstered by youngsters Rod Langway and Brian Engblom, who were really coming along well. And they also had Robert Picard and Gaston Gindra. Guy Lafleur was battling significant injuries, having only played 78 games in the prior 2 seasons. But the Habs were still a team that could contend, no doubt. Now with the new divisional playoff format debuting this season, a new adversary was in the midst, their provincial rivals, the Quebec Nordiques. One man who also wasn't ready to give up on Lafleur was his former head coach, Scotty Bowman, who would once again be the coach of Team Canada for the 1981 Canada Cup, which saw Lafleur join Gainey as well as Engblom and Robinson for Team Canada. Rod Langway joined Team USA as 5 Habs total were represented. Many were looking forward to Lafleur and Gretzky being paired together, and they worked very well, collaborating on nearly a quarter of Canada's goals. Lafleur was actually tied with Mike Bossy and Brian Trottier of the New York Islanders, and both playing for Team Canada for second in scoring with 11 points. Wayne Gretzky led the way with 12. Unfortunately, Canada was utterly humiliated in the final 8-1 by the Soviet Union, who took home the championship. But now it was back to business in the NHL. Lafleur's health was still a big concern, but again, he started off hot to begin the season. In the month of October, he had 20 points in the first 10 games, averaging 2 points a game. Again, looking like the flower we all know and love. That included 3 games of 3 or more points, one of which was a 4-point outing against the Canucks. On November 21st, he had a goal and 4 assists for 5 points. He had 16 points in 12 games in December, and by the halfway point of the season had only missed 4 games. And he had 51 points in 36 games and was a plus 17 at that point, looking like he'd be on track to reach 100 points again. In January, his production slipped, but he was still averaging a point a game. In February, his production actually slipped lower to 11 points in 13 games, but the Habs as a whole were having an excellent season. And in March, Lafleur was having a stretch of great games, 9 points in 5 games to be exact, and none of them were losses. But then Lafleur missed 9 games after he was injured during a game against Chicago, where he actually had a goal and an assist that night. He returned just before the end of the season. He had 27 goals, 57 assists for 84 points in 66 games, having missed 14 overall during the season. This is very impressive, again, for someone who missed a significant amount of games, and had 14 more points than the previous season, in 15 more games to boot. But the media still speculated that he wasn't 100%. The Habs were outstanding, 46, 17, and 17 for 109 points, first place in the Adams Division, and third best record in the league. And now for the Adams Division semifinals, they were about to write an early chapter in what would become the most heated rivalries in pro sports during the 1980s, as they would take on in the first round the Quebec Nordiques. In their 3rd year of existence in the NHL, they were now a 500 club, finishing with 82 points, and of course were led by the Stasi brothers, Marion, Anton, and superstar forward, one of the league's top scorers, Peter. Also one of the best left wingers in the game, Michel Goulet, a really highly talented Réal Cloutier, gritty and outright brutal power forward Dale Hunter, and a pretty good defense led by Mario Marois and Norman Rochefort. And in goal, 2 seasoned vets. You had John Garrett and the sensational Dan Bouchard. The Habs are the heavy favorites, as many feel this team is better than the previous 2 seasons, more focused and ready, as they relied on a young netminder, Rick Wamsley. Game 1 is full of scraps and scuffles, and even a couple of fights. But when it comes to the score sheet, Mario Tremblay opened the scoring 56 seconds in, and the Habs never looked back. After taking a 3-0 lead, not 1, but 2 shorthanded goals in the third period made it 5-0 en route to a 5-1 win. Game 2, the Nordiques led 1-0 after the first period, but 26 seconds into the second period, Acton to Napier to Guy. The game is tied. The Habs took a 2-1 lead, but just over 2 minutes later, the Nords tied it, and it remained 2-2 after 2. The game was intense and gritty, but it was early in the third. Pierre Aubry scored to give the Nords the lead, and the Habs bombarded Bouchard, who was amazing in net, and they couldn't get anything past him in the third period, and the Nords pull off a shocking win. The series is tied as it shifts to Quebec, and the fans are rabid for the first ever playoff game in Quebec City, well, NHL playoff game anyway, and they want oh so bad to humiliate their rivals. It's another gritty penalty-filled game, and while they don't quite humiliate the Habs, Dale Hunter does have 2 goals, 1-12 apart late in the first period. And Bouchard is amazing in net, and the Norwich checkers on defense are keeping the Habs at bay. It's still 2-0 as the third period winds down, but on a power play, Mondu sets up Guy, and he scores with 26 seconds left. The Habs use what little time they have to press for the equalizer, but the Nordiques win, and they're just one game from eliminating the Habs. Tell me this isn't happening! Ugh. Game 4, the Habs are in a do-or-die situation, and about 35 seconds after Doug Riseborough opened the scoring, it's a brawl! Oh yes, the first of many in the next decade between these two teams. The Nords use that momentum to tie it, but the Habs led 2-1 after 1. Lafleur gets an assist in what ends up being a 6-2 win for Montreal. They save their season, and the series is tied, and we now go to Montreal for a 5th and deciding winner-takes-all game. Indeed, Game 5 at the Montreal Forum, the crowd is hungry for blood, and while we get some dirty plays and penalties, it's the most focused game of the series. The Habs, however, trail 2-0 after 2 periods, but tie it in the 3rd period, so we're off to OT, which will no doubt be thrilling and long, and then Dale Hunter scores a very bizarre goal that's just 22 seconds in. The Habs season is over again thanks to an upset. Lafleur played better than he did the previous year with 3 points in 5 games and was a -1, but still nothing mind-blowing, and I still say had it not been for what happened the year prior, it wouldn't have been seen as bad as it really was, as the Nordiques team at least was a winning club when the Oilers were not at the time, but that's still back-to-back first-round exits. The last time that happened? 1963-64. Yes, in the original 6 era where there only was 1 round prior to the Stanley Cup. Ugh. Habs Nation was definitely under fire. The Nords made it all the way to the conference finals before getting swept out by the eventual 3-time Stanley Cup champion, New York Islanders. Keith Acton became the new top center along with Lafleur and Shutt beside him. Pierre LaRouche struggled and was traded during the season to Hartford. They were still trying to make Doug Wickenheiser the top center with Lafleur, but just something wasn't clicking. Acton's numbers were insane with Lafleur. The man deemed too short for the NHL assisted on 14 of 27 of Guy's goals, just above half. They also collaborated on 15 assists together, and overall collaborated on 45 goals. And yes, Shutt was still playing in the mix as well. Despite a dip in production, Lafleur assisted on 18 of Shutt's goals. Shutt had 35, so that's just above half, were assisted by the Flower. Guy also still clicked well, of course, with Larry Robinson. This would be the first time since 1973-74 that Lafleur didn't register a single vote for the Hart Trophy, but again had some Lady Byng Trophy votes and finished in 11th. However, after his streak ended last year, he was winning his 7th Molson Cup as the team's leading point getter for 3-star selections. Some members of the media were on his case about his so-called decline, which seemed like a lot of hoopla and nothing more. And while you can see he has slowed down somewhat, he's still a very productive forward, and we still would see those great highlight reel plays. 84 points in 66 games. And it's true, if he had played a full schedule, he may not have made 100, but we'll never truly know. With the fact that he's known to break out multi-point games in certain stretches, it was still very likely. Lafleur's unfair media criticisms aside, there was no doubt there were some problems in Montreal. I mean, sure, they were consistently a 100-point team in the 3 seasons since their last Cup win, but they've also just won 1 playoff series that entire time. Irving Grundman, again, even just his name, Irving Grundman, is cringy, and has made some very questionable decisions. The Habs spent time developing their defense in the future, as Savard and Lapointe both got older and now were with other teams to boot. And Rod Langway and Brian Engblom were putting up some great numbers, especially the plus-minus statistics, and were playing superb. So what did Irving Grundman do? He traded them to Washington. Yes, these 2 bright young defensemen that they'd spent all this time developing to become the future of the team were sent to Washington, along with an elite defensive forward, Doug Jarvis, who hadn't missed a game in 7 seasons and was on the verge of becoming the NHL's new Iron Man. And right winger Craig Laughlin went with them to boot. In return, the Habs received Ryan Walter, who with no doubt was a very talented left winger, a steady scorer with defensive capabilities, and defenseman Rick Green, again talented, but definitely not worth what they gave up. Montreal fans raged at this trade and called for Grundman's head. And the fact that the first rounder from 1980, Doug Wickenheiser, really hadn't panned out either, and also the fact that the last few first-round picks, and just draft picks overall in general, weren't really developing at a good rate. Well, as for our hero, he got off to a red-hot start once the season began, shutting people up. In just the 3rd game of the year, he notched his 15th career hat trick and added 2 assists for a 5-point night against Chicago, led him to a huge October with 17 points in 11 games. However, on a November 9th win over the Minnesota North Stars, where Lafleur had an assist, And the Habs, despite the questionable move that shocked many, they were actually 11-2-3. However, Lafleur was injured in this game and would miss the next 10. Once again, the Boo Birds are chirping, but he returned with a vengeance in his first game back on December 4th. He had an assist in a loss against Boston, but then in a home-and-home series against Hartford, first game, a goal and 3 assists. Second game, a goal, 3 assists. 2 4-point games, 8 points in 2 games. Lafleur and the Habs as a whole went into a bit of a lull the rest of December, but he was still somewhat productive. In January, things were better. Lafleur had 14 points in 13 games, including 3-point games against Pittsburgh on January 2nd, another one against LA on January 6th. His production slipped in February, but still had another 3-point game with 3 assists against the Nordiques. And in March, he stayed somewhat consistent and had one more 3-point game on March 5th in a win over the Blues. He would finish the year with 27 goals, 49 assists for 76 points in 68 games, missing just 12 all season. Still very productive, but still many were expecting him to rack up the numbers he did in the 70s, but that was not the case. The Habs finished 42-24-14 for 98 points. A very good season, however. This is actually the first time they finished below 100 points since 1973-74. They finished second in the Adams division and faced the third-place Buffalo Sabres, who finished with 89 points. They were still led by ageless wonder Gilbert Perreault, as well as great younger talents, power forward Mike Foligno, Tony McKegney, and rookie Dave Andrechuk. You also had two-way forward Craig Ramsey, a gritty defense led by Mike Ramsey, spelled differently, Lindy Ruff, John Van Boxmeer, and rookie phenom Phil Housley. And in net you had Bob Sauvé, former Vezina Trophy winner. And the coach? Scotty Bowman. Yes, indeed. The man behind the Habs dynasty in the 70s. Game 1 in Montreal, both defenses were amazing and the goaltenders were coming up with some big saves when they needed to. The Sabres, however, got on the board after a Brent Peterson goal, and the Habs had no response. They couldn't muster up any chances and would lose 1-0. Game 2, and Dale McCourt strikes early, and the Sabres defense just destroyed the Habs, giving them nothing to work with, no substantial ongoing rushes, and when they did, Sauvé stopped everything. Then in the second, the Sabres scored 2 goals 36 seconds apart. The Habs, again, literally had nothing. They lose 3-0, dropping both games at home, and they haven't scored a goal yet. Game 3, fans pretty much losing hope at this point as the series shifts to Buffalo. And exactly 147 minutes and 25 seconds of no goals in this series. In the second period, Habs rookie star Mats Naslund on the power play is set up for Lafleur, scored to make it 1-0. But the Sabres strike with 2 quick goals late in the frame and lead 2-1. Midway through the third, however, that legendary combo strikes as Mondu gives it to Lafleur, who sets up shut. It's tied 2-2. But with 4:10 to go, Tony McKegney scores, and the Habs press, but an empty netter with 25 seconds to play beat as the Habs season, a third straight first-round exit to a team once again they were favored to beat. The Habs as a whole were a lifeless bunch, a sad group looking like they had nothing, and Lafleur's 2 points led the team in scoring. Oy. This is where they were, and as a result, the Irving Grumman era was finally over as his time as general manager came to a close. Thank God. Bob Berry, however, made a risky decision this season as he tried again putting Wickenheiser with Lafleur and taking away Steve Shutt and putting him on a different line and making Ryan Walter Lafleur's man on the left side. And to the surprise of many, it actually worked. Walter assisted on 12 of Lafleur's 27 goals, and Wickenheiser, who had been written off, had the best year of his career at this point. And Lafleur assisted on 16 of his goals. That's all but 9 that Wick scored that year. He and Walter collaborated on 9 assists, and he was still shifted together somewhat often with Shutt and Acton, but both, especially in the case of Acton, saw a dip in production. Yeah, okay, he slowed down a little, and he may not be occupying highlight reels like he used to. But the Habs were second in the league in goals scored, so clearly their system was working. 76 points in 68 games is a dip in production, but not a huge one. Lafleur led the team in scoring debut for the 7th time in his career. His +5, however, was the lowest of his career. Yes, some things were working, but some things needed to change as due to the Habs' lack of playoff success. And indeed, changes are coming in Montreal. What some people don't realize is that even though 32 can still be young, even for a hockey player, when you've suffered numerous injuries, have missed 55 games in 3 seasons, especially when some of those injuries include your knee, sometimes things aren't going to be the same. It's just something that happens to the majority of athletes when they hit the downswing of their career. They change the way they play. Their stats change. Also, players around them change. It's all part of the game. And indeed, change is the big thing coming in Montreal. As the new GM to replace Grumman, who was fired in the offseason. The new man in charge, Serge Savard. After playing 2 seasons in Winnipeg, the legendary Habs defenseman returns in an office role. He still kept on Bob Barry as the head coach, however. And new stars were actually starting to emerge in Montreal. Despite the questionable trade of Langway and Engblom, the likes of Rick Green, who they acquired from that trade, and young Craig Ludwig were evolving very nicely, and Larry Robinson was still among the best in the league. Also, Swedish import Mats Naslund up front had an excellent rookie year. A new two-way center to fill the void left by Jarvis, Guy Carbonneau, was also playing very well, and Mark Napier was coming off of a big season. In 1983-84, the Habs were still looking like they'd be a top contender. Our hero was closing in on another milestone. And at this point, only 9 players in the NHL have reached 500 career goals. And our hero was ready to become number 10 all time. And much like when he reached his 1,000th point, the Habs could become the first team to have 3 500-goal scorers, all to score those goals wearing that one Habs uniform, as Rocket Richard was the first ever to reach the milestone in NHL history, and then Jean Beliveau had accomplished the feat later on. Lafleur was entering the year with 486 goals, but again his health is called into question. Lafleur looked good early on, with 11 points, 11 games in October, including a 3-point night and a win over Quebec. But the Habs got off to a terrible start, and as a result, Savard wasted no time in dealing with this by trading Keith Acton in Minnesota for star center Bobby Smith. The Habs improved a little in November, but were still 11-12-1. Our hero had just 10 points in 13 games. Lafleur then hit a bigger slump in December, a 5-game scoreless streak. However, he broke the streak with a vengeance against the Pittsburgh Penguins with a 2-goal game, and those were career goals 498 and 499. On December 20th, 1983, the Habs visited the lowly New Jersey Devils. It was going to be an easy game for the Habs despite their struggles, as the Devils put up barely any of a fight, and by the third period, Montreal led 5-0. At 8:35 into the third period, Bob Gainey began a rush that led to Pierre Mondu finding a wide-open Lafleur, who made a great move and sniped an excellent shot past Chico Resch for a goal number 500. Indeed, becoming the 10th player in NHL history to do so, and making the Habs the only team at that point to have 3 players score all 500 goals wearing the same uniform. A journey that began on October 23rd, 1971, scoring a goal on Gary Edwards, culminates on December 20th, 1983, scoring a goal on Chico Resch. That win actually put the Habs on a 4-game unbeaten streak, but in January they had trouble finding consistency, and Lafleur couldn't get a hot streak going. But to be fair, everyone else really couldn't either. The Habs were suffering from bad inconsistencies from many of their star players this year. And Lafleur, however, had a huge 4-point night in a 7-7 tie with Hartford, and then his 16th career hat-trick in a loss on February 9th against the Vancouver Canucks. On February 23rd, the Canadiens lost to the Winnipeg Jets. It was their 3rd loss in a row and 5th in 7 games. The team was 28-30-5, 4th place in the Adams division, and they were hanging on to that final playoff spot, but not even close to be hanging on to it by a thread, as their saving grace was that the last place Whalers were still quite distantly behind. But Serge Savard made another bold move. He fired head coach Bob Barry and hired someone Lafleur was also very familiar with, Jacques Lemaire, his former teammate and line-mate during those glory days. Lemaire, since retiring in 1979, coached a couple years in Switzerland, had a short stint coaching in the NCAA as well as the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. The team, however, didn't really improve all that much under Lemaire for the remainder of this season. In the 63 games Lafleur played under Bob Barry this season, he had 28 goals, 31 assists for 59 points, averaging around 0.94 points a game, below par, but he was still the team's top scorer. Lemaire implemented a much more defensively grounded system, and the Habs were always known for their defensive play because of Bowman, but Lemaire's style of it was a little more unique and did some tweaks to it, similar to the trap style that he would help perfect in 1990s as the coach of the New Jersey Devils. But for Lafleur, it diminished his offensive input. He did score his 30th goal of the year on March the 1st in a win over the Red Wings, the first time he's reached the mark since the 79-80 season. His style of play, however, didn't match Lemaire's system. He had 11 points in 17 games, averaging around 0.65 points a game. He actually went goalless in the last 15 games of the season, and the Habs didn't really improve all that much. They did win the first 3 games with Lemaire as their coach, and were going to lose 4 of the next 5, and despite another 3-game win streak, they ended the season on a 6-game losing streak. Despite all this, however, the Habs still made the playoffs with a 35-40-5 record, their first losing record since the 1950-51 season. However, that year they did make the Stanley Cup. But the hopes were low as the Habs were about to take on the powerful Boston Bruins in the opening round, who had finished with 104 points, the second best total in the league. They were a complete team up and down the line, led by a highly talented 100-point scorer Barry Peterson. They also still had Rick Middleton from those days in the 70s rivalry between the Habs and Bruins, who had a 100-point season himself. You had talented forwards such as Tom Fergus, Keith Crowder, another 70s icon, Terry O'Reilly, and grinding forwards such as Craig McTavish, Mike Krushelnyski, and Steve Kastler. On defense, another man Habs were very familiar with, Mike Milbury. You also had Mike O'Connell, Gord Kluzak, and the phenomenal Raymond Bourque. And in net, former Vezina Trophy winner from the year prior, Pete Peters. This is the first meeting between the two teams since that infamous 1979 series, where our hero was the hero late in the game, scoring that infamous tying power play goal. The Bruins haven't beaten the Canadiens in a playoff series since 1943. The Habs were on a winning streak of 14 playoff series against Boston. But hey, all streaks must come to an end, right? Game 1 in Boston Garden, and the Habs start Steve Penny. Rick Wamsley did not have a great year, and Richard Sevigne didn't have anything stellar happening either, but Steve Penny has 4 games experience and hasn't won a single one. This isn't going to be good, but then something happened. The Steve Penny kid's is actually not that bad. He stopped all but one shot, and the system Lemaire implementing seemed to be working. And the addition of some U.S. Olympic hockey defenseman named Chris Chelios seemed to help matters a bit. And the Habs walked away with a 2-1 win. A big shock to say the least. But hey, playoff game upsets, like I said, it happened like this all the time, right? Well, hey, game 2, Bob Gainey led the charge in a fight-filled game that reignited what had become a stagnant rivalry. But the Habs again shocked the Bruins in the Garden. Penny is incredible in net. They take game 2, 3-1. Wow. Game 3, the series shifts to Montreal. Can they pull off the shocking sweep? Lafleur, who for the first time since the 78-79 season played all 80 regular season games. But he would sadly miss this playoff game, and he wasn't really getting much ice time to begin with in the first 2 games and had been very quiet. But for the 3rd game, the Montreal form is the loudest it has been all season. Lemaire's defensive system is frustrating the Bruins. Gainey, Robinson, Shutt, and Tremblay each have 2 points in a 5-0 win. A massive upset is complete as Steve Penny gets the shutout. The Habs break their first-round playoff losing streak and win their first playoff series since 1980. For the first time in his entire career, Lafleur went pointless in a playoff series, as Lemaire's system seems to necessitate the use of the flower less and less. But be that as it may, the Habs still move forward in the playoffs. And now from one heated rival to another, who at this point was their biggest rival, the Quebec Nordiques, the playoff version of the Battle of Quebec Part 2. Many of those same Nords players now had just a little bit more grittiness and aggressiveness, with power forward Will Paymont now on the club. The Nords pull off an upset, beating the Sabres, but were still favored over the Habs in this series with 94 points compared to Montreal's 75. Game 1 at Le Colisée in Quebec, Lafleur is still out of the lineup. A game of 84 total penalty minutes, and the Habs lose 4-2. Game 2, 96 total penalty minutes, but Lemaire's defensive strategy now gets to the Nords, and the Habs take the game 4-1, and the series is tied as we head to Montreal. Game 3, indeed, we shift to the form, and the flower is back. And again, the Habs defense is taking it to the Nordiques. Still, lots of penalties, but not near as much as the first 2 games. Tied 1-1 after the first period on the power play. Guy finds a wide-open Ryan Walter who parks at home, and that's all it takes. It stays 2-1, and the Habs now lead the series 2-1 to boot. Well, Game 4 is a very disciplined game on both sides, as the Habs did lead 2-0 after the first period, and 3-1 during the second, but the Nords tied it, and the game went to overtime. Exactly 3 minutes in, Bo Berglund scores, and the series is tied at 2. We head to Quebec for Game 5. Steve Penny is amazing in net, and Mats Naslund led the way, and Montreal takes the game 4-0, and now have the Nordiques on the verge of elimination. So here we go, Game 6 on a holiday known as Good Friday. Well, the game started with a fight 23 seconds in, pretty much a sign of things to come, and the Nordiques led 1-0 after 1. Then as the second period was drawing to a close and still score 1-0, the Good Friday Massacre began. A brawl so crazy that even backup goaltenders got into it. Our hero, however, did not. Our hero was just playing a role of restrainer with other star players. A couple of notable incidents to point out, however. Louis Slager sucker-punching Jean Hamel of the Habs, knocking him unconscious, pretty much changing the trajectory of his career. Mario Tremblay completely wrecking Peter Sassy's nose. And when the dust settled, the teams came out for the third period warm-up and started again before the puck even dropped. It resulted in 8 game misconducts, over 200 penalty minutes being assessed for this brawl alone. And when it got back to hockey, the Nords took a 2-0 lead. But then the Habs went on a tear. 5 goals, and our hero assisted on one of them to John Chabot. The Habs get the win, 5-3, in one of the most infamous games in NHL history. and for the first time since 1979, the Habs will play in a semifinal series. Lafleur had 2 assists and was a +1 in the 4 games he played, so his contributions were a little more present in this series, but again, was not really being utilized as a top-scoring forward. The Habs' run continued as they were now set to face a team who for years tried to knock them off their throne and eventually did take it over. We're talking about the 4-time defending Stanley Cup champions, the New York Islanders. And hey, they were all here. Trottier, Bossy, Gillies, Tonelli, the Sutter brothers, and captain and star defenseman Denny Potvin. Also had character players, Goring, Bobby Nye, Bobby Bourne. Joining Denny on defense, Langevin, Person, Janssen, Morrow, and in net, Batlin Billy Smith. They led still by coach Al Arbour behind the bench. This playoff format was odd, don't ask, but Game 1 emanates from Montreal. The crowd was ready, and so are the Habs. Steve Petty is awesome in net and gets a big shutout. His third of the playoffs. Chris Chelios looks amazing, and the Habs win 3-0. Game 2, Montreal remains focused and ready, and they shock the hockey world. The miracle is truly going to happen. They win 4-2 and lead the series 2-0. The Islanders have never been down in 2 games during their reign on top of the league here. How fitting would it be for the previous Kings of the Mountain, and now major underdogs, to end the reign of the current Kings of this New York Islanders team, who going into this series have won 18 straight playoff series, an NHL record. But we shift to the Island for Game 3. Lafleur will get an assist on a Pierre Mondu goal, but the Isles were in control the whole way and won 5-2. Game 4, Billy Smith is the one who shines in net, like he has many times in previous playoff years, and the Isles tie the series with a 3-1 win. Game 5 in Montreal, Habs fans still have faith. However, it is dashed as the Isles defense controls the Habs, and they score another 3-1 win. Game 6 in New York, it's rich academic at this point. The miracle run is over. A 4-1 win for the New York Islanders, and they take the series in 6 games. They're headed to the Stanley Cup for the 5th straight year. However, their reign would actually come to an end at the hands of the new Kings of the Mountain, the Edmonton Oilers. Their worst season in recent memory ended up being their best playoff run in 5 years, but our hero wasn't exactly a huge part of it. Just 1 assist in 6 games in this series, and in 12 games had just 3 assists, no goals. It was a decent +1, but now the media had reason to be concerned about his future. The Habs were a jumbled mess and mixing up lines all year long, seeing what would work and what wouldn't, and yada yada yada, and you had 2 different coaches trying to make something work. Not to mention in Lafleur's case, 2 of the centers he spent the last little while building chemistry and gelling with, Keith Atkin and Doug Wickenheiser, were both traded. However, the man they traded Acton for was the only one Lafleur worked well with consistently, Bobby Smith. In total, they collaborated one way or another for 23 goals. Smith assisted on 7 of Lafleur's 30 goals. 19 different players assisted on Guy's 30 goals. A quarter of Guy's assists, the 40 that is, went to Smith, who scored 26 all year for the Habs, making it close to half. As Lafleur assisted on goals again for 18 different players. On assist collaborations again led by Smith, and Lafleur again combined with 19 different players for assists as well. Everything was just all over the place. Yeah, on paper, it's not his best year, but he reached 30 goals for the first time since the 79-80 season, and for the 8th time in his career, led his team in scoring. He played the full 80 games for the first time since the 78-79 season. He became the 10th player in NHL history to reach 500 career goals. But for the first time in his career, finishes in the minus with a lackluster -16. And once Jacques Lemaire took over, his game took a nosedive, as did his ice time. Even in their deep run in the playoffs, it did as well. So yes, the irrational Montreal media may have a point in Lafleur's future being in doubt, as Lemaire was named full-time head coach. Lafleur, to boot after everything that has happened, was passed over for the 1984 Canada Cup after playing in the last 2, or actually the first 2. While teammate Larry Robinson became the only player to play in all 3 at that point. Canada would actually win the tournament to boot. While Lafleur's role was going to be on this team was anyone's guess going into 1984-85, he was pushing 33 years old, but likely felt he still had a lot of years left in him, but it seemed his prowess was not going to be utilized in what was to be his 14th NHL season. Lafleur never got to face his idol Jean Beliveau, but Mario Lemieux, that same dapper young man sitting front row to see his hero Guy Lafleur scores 1,000th career point, got to play against his, as the Habs did beat the Penguins 4-3, as Lemieux had an assist while Guy was pointless, but Lemieux got to share the NHL ice in the Montreal Forum no less, with his idol in just his 2nd career game. Lafleur got his first goal of the year in the 3rd game, and the Habs were in the midst of a 6-game unbeaten streak, which included a 2-point game with a goal and an assist against Buffalo on October 25th. He was also named the game's 2nd star. The win streak came to an end when Lemieux and Lafleur squared off again, but the point totals were the same. But this time the Penguins would win 4-3. But then the rumors began. After an assistant win over the New York Islanders, Lafleur began what would be a 9-game scoreless drought, the largest of his career. Sadly, what the media was trying to say for the last few seasons was actually coming true for once. And yes, while his ice time was cut, even when he was out there, the spark was gone. So was that flair. And that grace, the chance of Guy, had turned to a little bit of booze. It was sad. The hero had fallen just like that. Because of his decreased scoring production, many felt it all led to this. I say the Habs being a mess thanks to Irving Grunman, and Lemaire's coaching, while effective, was still a little too ahead of its time. Lafleur butted heads with his former teammate and now coach about all of this, but Lemaire didn't waver. On November 24, 1984, the Habs were victorious in a home game against the Detroit Red Wings, and were looking great this season with a 13-4-2 record to start. However, not even 48 hours after that game, the report came out in the Montreal Gazette. Guy Lafleur had played his last game for the Montreal Canadiens. Just over a month removed from his 33rd birthday and 19 games into his 14th NHL season, the flower at last had wilted. It wasn't just the issue with Lemaire and the rough season he was having. It was a combination of many things, clearly. There was a lot of injuries that had added up. And he also had a wife and 2 young sons that, he would probably like to spend some time with. But that didn't mean he wanted to walk away, not like this. And he apparently had requested a trade to his other former teammate, that of course being GM Serge Savard. He refused, apparently due to the fact that despite Lafleur's decline and the fans' impatience, trading him would cause a major backlash. He was left with no other option. Pretty much left out to dry by 2 men he shared a locker room with for many years. On February 16, 1985, however, the Habs organization honored the man who had become ingrained in their culture by retiring the number 10. A well-deserved honor, which even at that point had been bestowed upon men that Lafleur had grew up idolizing, including, of course, the great Jean Beliveau. But he was not content to wear a suit and give a speech. He was going to take one last lap around the ice and in full uniform deliver said speech. His teammates, past and present, honored him, and the opposing Buffalo Sabres showed their respect, especially his longtime contemporary Gilbert Perreault. The legendary numero 10, with Lafleur's name above it, was immortalized in the most storied hockey arena in the world, the Raptors of the Montreal Forum. Obviously, with just 2 goals and 3 assists for 5 points in 19 games, the stats don't really mean much, but at least he assisted on one last goal for Steve Shutt, who would actually be traded that same year. Also, he retired after the end of this season. And he still got to work together with longtime teammate Larry Robinson to boot, as the two always had great chemistry over the years, especially on the power play. So this was it. The Flower's career didn't go out with the bang like it should have, but his name in Montreal was right up there with the Morenzes, the Joliats, the Richardses, both of them, the Belliveaux, the Geoffrions, the Plants. He had become an icon, and while his finesse and grace and superb playmaking abilities, of course, were all a major part of who he is, but it was more his leadership, his desire to win, and his work ethic that really should get noticed more. Something that sometimes is forgotten among any star player is their heart. It isn't just their natural talent, and Lafleur had plenty of heart. The 1984-85 season, the same year Lafleur retired, the Habs did have a good year, finishing with 94 points, second in the Adams division. They made it past the first round again, beating Boston, but would lose to Quebec in 7 games. Lemaire stepped away from the bench, but became the assistant general manager to Serge Savard. Habs would make a shocking run to win the Stanley Cup in 1986, as Robinson and Gainey were the only 2 people on that team from those Habs glory days. Lafleur was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility in 1988, a well-deserved honor for a man who brought honor to the game. I mean, this sums it up pretty damn good when it comes to the accolades. 5 Stanley Cups, including the infamous 4 in a row, Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP in 1977, 3 scoring titles, 2 Hart Trophies as league MVP, 3 Pearson Trophies as Player's Choice MVP, a Canada Cup. He played in 2 tournaments, also played the 1981 World Hockey Championships, was a first-team All-Star 6 straight seasons, played in 5 All-Star games, plus the Challenge Cup, 1,000 career points, and at the time, the fastest to it, 500 career goals, only the 10th player at the time to do so. Held the NHL record for 6 consecutive 50-goal seasons, which was later broken by Mike Bossy, who did it with 9. He tied the record for consecutive 100-point seasons with Bobby Orr with 6, but that was later broken with Wayne Gretzky with 13. 7 Molson Cups as the team's best 3-star point getter, and he was often among leaders in plus-minus, power play goals, and game-winning goals. He retired the Habs' all-time point leader with 1,246 points. It still stands to this very day. And second all-time in team goals with 518. Also still second all-time as of 2022. An incredible career from an incredible hockey player. Well, that does it for our look at the career of the great Guy Lafleur. What other players... Oh, wait, what? He's not done? That's right. Lafleur felt he was in good enough shape for a comeback as he neared 37 years old. The same year, he became a Hall of Famer. He made his way to the New York Rangers training camp for a tryout. And yes, you can see in this picture, he's not wearing the infamous number 10. As a matter of fact, the number 10 was actually being worn by his former teammate on the Habs and line mate, Pierre LaRouche. However, LaRouche retired just a few days into training camp due to serious back injuries. Lafleur played excellently in a preseason game, so much so that Mark Messier of the Edmonton Oilers, who was the Rangers' opposition that night, convinced friend and Rangers general manager Phil Esposito to sign him to a contract. And indeed, Lafleur, who didn't use his star reputation to try to get a spot, earned it. The story, of course, made waves in New York, but in Montreal it was front-page news on every paper and covered extensively on television and radio. And while Habs fans didn't like seeing their hero in another team's uniform, they were thrilled he was back in the game. Perhaps now he can retire on his terms, which many believe is one of the many reasons he came back. The Rangers were a rebuilding club, full of young, promising talent, and they had a new head coach. Well, new from the prior season, that is, Michel Bergeron, another friend of Lafleur's, who of course was a legendary head coach for 7 seasons during the peak of the Battle of Quebec rivalry for the Nordiques. Up front, you had tremendous young talents like Thomas Sandstrom and Tony Granato. You had veterans like Brian Mullen, Kelly Kizio, and former Red Wings all-star John Ogrodnik. Also, 18-year veteran Marcel Dion, Lafleur's counterpart and contemporary dating back to the 1971 NHL draft. They were now teammates at long last. Dion at this point was the NHL's second all-time leading scorer behind Gordie Howe. On defense, you had a talented bunch as well: James Patrick, Michel Petit, David Shaw, Mark Hardy, and a promising rookie by the name of Brian Leach. In net, you had the Beezer himself, John Van Beesbrook, and an often reliable backup, Bob Froese. The Rangers had missed the playoffs for the first time since 1977 in the prior season, and were looking to rebound. Well, Lafleur suited up for his first regular season game in almost 4 years, and donning his famous number 10 in doing so, on October 6, 1988 in Chicago. Now, no one was really expecting the Lafleur of old to be consistently present. He was brought to the team to be a role player, to lead the young talent, and more so work on, different lines depending on how he gelled. But he was pointless and a -2 in his first 4 games. But on October 16, 1988, as the Rangers hosted the Vancouver Canucks, Marcel Dion, of all people, set up the flower for his first goal in nearly 4 years, and his first as a Ranger, and the 519th goal of his career. Unbelievable that this was his first goal not wearing a Canadiens uniform. Lafleur added an assist on a Brian Leach goal just over 3.5 minutes later. A 2-point game and was named the game's first star. He then follows that up with another 2-point outing, this time 2 assists in a win over division rivals Washington. And then 2 games later, a goal and an assist in a win over Quebec, as the Rangers were in the midst of a 7-game winning streak. And indeed, the 7th game in that streak was a win over the Penguins, and now Mario Lemieux would get to play his idol often, who is now a division rival. Lemieux had become arguably the most phenomenal player in the game during Lafleur's retirement. Lafleur ended October with 8 points in 11 games and was a +3, not bad at all. In November, the Rangers struggled a bit, however, but our hero remained pretty consistent with 10 points in 13 games. That included a game on November 21st for the first time playing against his former team, the Habs, at home at Madison Square Garden. And hey, some of his old teammates were there, and Lafleur did score a goal on Brian Hayward, but the Rangers would lose 4-2. Then on November 27th, he had a 3-point night against the Islanders. And then in a very next game, on a road win in Winnipeg, he had 2 goals. And then on December 4th, a huge night. 4 assists in a 10-6 loss, however, to Edmonton. Lafleur's own injury issues, however, seemed to rear their head, and he missed 11 games between December 10th and January 7th. However, he would remain healthy for the rest of the season, missing only just 2 more games. He had an assist in his first game back, but then went on a 5-game scoreless drought, but then broke out with 5 points in 5 games. But then came the game everyone was waiting for. February 4th, 1989, the New York Rangers visit the Montreal Canadiens. The media and press were all over this. It was the hottest ticket in town. A game that's going to be broadcast in front of one of the highest rated TV audiences all year on CBC. Tickets were being sold by scalpers for hundreds upon hundreds of dollars. The Habs at this point were once again one of the best teams in the NHL, and 2 of Lafleur's former teammates from those glory days, Larry Robinson and team captain Bob Gainey, were still around. Other former teammates such as Matt Snaslin, Chris Chelios, Guy Carbonneau, and Craig Ludwig, as well as the last of his line mates, and Ryan Walter and Bobby Smith, and they were all still there in the midst of great careers in their own right. And the men who practically forced them out of the game, Serge Savard and Jacques Lemaire, were still steering the ship. Savard was still the general manager. Lemaire was indeed the assistant general manager. And just before the pregame warm-ups, the chants started. Guy, Guy, Guy. And fitting that the color commentator for CBC on this game was his former coach, Scotty Bowman. A standing ovation for the Flower during the warm-ups. He was still their hero. The first time he touched the puck early in the game, the crowd let out a shout of Guy. The Habs led 1-0 early in the first, but 49 seconds after that, Lafleur set up defenseman David Shaw, who scored in the foreign crowd, cheered, and cheered even louder when the PA announcer had confirmed that Lafleur had an assist on the goal. Those familiar chants he heard were still echoing every time he touched that puck. That familiar grace, that action star-like glide up the ice, was back on this night. The Rangers led 3-2 in the second period when Jason Lafreniere set up Lafleur perfectly, who scored a goal, and the foreign crowd came unglued. Lafleur then scored a beauty to make it 5-2, and again the crowd erupted in joy, as both goals were scored on the great Patrick Waugh, and those epic chants continued. Guy, Guy, Guy. The Rangers, however, would fall apart and lose 7-5, but it was still Lafleur's night. 2 goals and an assist for a 3-point night. He was named the game's first star, and when he was announced as such, the crowd gave him one last standing ovation and one last epic chant of Guy, Guy, Guy. One of the most memorable nights of his career. And while nothing was going to top that night, he still showed part of that old Flower in a few more games, with 3 assists in a February 25th win against the Nordiques. And then, in the very next game on March the 1st, he scored his first hat-trick in 5 years, and against Wayne Gretzky and the LA Kings no less in a 6-4 win. It'd be the 17th and final hat-trick of his great career. Near the end of the year, the Rangers would lose 5 of 6 games, and with just 2 games to go in the season, tension between GM Phil Esposito and coach Michel Bergeron was brewing, and Bergie was fired. Yes, with 2 games to go, and the Rangers already having clinched a playoff spot, he was fired. Well, let's just say Espo ranks up in the likes of Irving Grunman when it comes to great GMs, quote-unquote. Espo took over as coach for the remainder of the season. Lafleur wasn't overly happy with this move. Either way, the Rangers still finished with a winning record of 37, 35, and 8 for 82 points, and would face the Pittsburgh Penguins in the first round. The Pens had one of the best seasons in franchise history, and of course led by Mario Lemieux, who had an astounding 199 points that season. They were also led by star defenseman, the great Paul Coffey, who I've covered on this channel. Up front, you also had all-star Rob Brown, you had Dan Quinn, Bob Airey, and John Cullen to boot. Joining Coffey on defense, you had Zarley Zalapsky and Randy Hillier, and in net, the awesome Tom Barrasso. Game 1 in Pittsburgh saw a game that had over 100 penalty minutes. The Pens bombarded the Rangers goalie Bob Froese and won 3-1. Game 2, the Rangers find themselves down 3-0, but our hero puts them on the board in the first period and scores his 58th career playoff goal, but the Rangers lose 7-4. The series shifts to the Garden for Game 3. And while the Rangers have fight in them, it's not enough. They lose 5-3. But now, the first round was a best of 7, so we're off to Game 4. Still in the Big Apple, and the Rangers nearly mount a comeback after being down 4-1 in the third, but come up short and lose 4-3, and the Pens complete the sweep. Our hero scored what would be his first and only playoff goal, not as a member of the Montreal Canadiens, and it was indeed his first playoff goal since 1982. However, the firing of Bergeron late in the season was as bad as it gets, and Lafleur's time in New York was pretty much up. Lafleur had 18 goals and 27 assists for 45 points in 67 games. Not bad for a guy who hadn't played in 4 years and was pushing his late 30s. Much like with Steve Shutt, however, in those glory years in Montreal, Lafleur's top guy to work with was at the left wing, it seemed. And that was especially the case for Brian Mullen, who Lafleur assisted on 5 goals for. And he, along with another left winger, John Agrodnik, each had 4 assists on Guy's 18 goals. They both provided on nearly half. Lafleur also worked well being paired with Thomas Sandstrom, and worked well like he did in Montreal with defensemen with offensive capabilities such as Jason Patrick and rookie Brian Leetch. Well, he looked good and contributed to this Rangers team and helped return them to the playoffs. He managed to finish on the plus side of things with a +1. And a huge year where he scored his 17th career hat trick, had a glorious return home to Montreal, and was mentoring many young players. He was also 10th in Lady Bing Trophy voting. Despite the success of his comeback, he was not happy with Bergeron's firing, which, to be fair, really didn't make a lot of sense, especially with the timing of it all. And he was going to follow Bergeron, who himself was going back home to Quebec. Only for Lafleur this time, it was to Quebec City. Despite his short stay, Lafleur won immense popularity amongst Big Apple fans, but he was signed as a free agent with the Quebec Nordiques. There were reports that Guy Lafleur turned down a $1 million deal to play for the LA Kings, where he could have not only played with Wayne Gretzky, but also reunite with fellow Habs legend Larry Robinson, who had actually just signed with the team this same year, leaving Montreal after 17 seasons. Lafleur may have been donning a different jersey, but he was still a god in the entire province of Quebec, and the Nordiques were a once prominent team, are now a comedy of errors. Bad management moves, not developing their young talent, draft busts back and forth, and hanging on to long-time veteran players made the team a basement dweller. Even hiring Bergeron back as coach was a puzzling move. Many felt he was actually part of the reason why the team fell apart as hard as they did. They still had future Hall of Famers, however, Peter Stastny and Michel Goulet, who were still productive but far from what they once were, and they had other forwards such as no longer productive Tony McKegney, fan favorite Mike Huff, tough guy Paul Gillis, and Claude Lucelle, who just seemed to be taking up space. On defense, you had Michel Petit, who is now in Quebec with Guy after being with him in New York. You had Joe Cirella and Mario Marois, who have both been good in the past, but were spinning their wheels in Quebec. In net, they had a good young goalie in the name of Ron Tugnut, and a host of backups, quite a few actually. But there was one guy who gave this city hope. A sophomore coming off a great rookie season, Joe Sakic. And believe me, I'll be covering this team in depth very soon. Lafleur was looking good, even if the Nordiques were not. He had 12 points in 12 games in the month of October, including 3 assists outing in a win over Minnesota. He had 4 points in 7 games to start November, but injuries would cause him to miss 16 games between November 14th and December 23rd. And he returned against Buffalo with a vengeance, 3 assists. Lafleur then had 7 points in 12 games in January, but he suffered a much more severe injury and would miss 25 games. That would bring the total to 41 he'd miss all year. He'd just play 39. He'd return on March 24th, and on March 27th would have another 3-assist game against his former team, the Rangers. But the fact is, 1977 Guy Lafleur couldn't save this Nordiques team, who just won 12 games all year. And for the first time in his career, Guy Lafleur would not be making a playoff appearance. His 12 goals and 22 assists for 34 points in 39 games was still showing he has something to offer. And Lafleur was massively popular among Nordiques fans who didn't really have much to cheer about all year. Lafleur clicked very well with the legendary Peter Stastny, who that very season was traded after 10 years. He was an icon in the city. The two combined for 14 of Lafleur's 34 points one way or another, just 3 short of half. And late in the season, he developed chemistry and mentored a young Joe Sakic. No, it was not a great year because the Nordiques were pretty much the complete opposite of a great team, but he provided veteran leadership and guidance for the likes of Sakic, again who he gelled very well with, and created some exciting moments with future Hall of Fame alumnus, making a dream team of Peter Stastny. He was a -15, the second worst of his career, but on this team, that's really not all that bad. He also finished 18th in Lady Bing Trophy voting. Lafleur never lost touch with who he was. We weren't going to get those 50-goal seasons or nightly highlight reels, but every so often, Lafleur, who is now inching closer to 40 years old, could still show flashes of it on a given night. But he took his role as mentor and leader seriously. He knew Quebec's young talent could use the guidance. In addition to Sakic, they now had a promising forward in Matt Sundin. And also, he was still a celebrity, still doing commercials. Around this time, a juice drink known as Flower Power was distributed. He still took the time to read his fan mail, sign autographs even after being exhausted from a given game. Going into the 1990-91 season, there still wasn't much hope for this Nordiques team, and many likely knew this would be Lafleur's last year. And this would be the farewell tour. And a huge honor of being named alternate captain bestowed upon Lafleur. Even though he never needed a letter on his jersey to punctuate his leadership skills, it still must have been quite an honor. This year starts good for Lafleur. 2 points on opening day in Hartford, an assist in a tie against Boston, and in what would be his last game at Maple Leaf Gardens, he scored a goal and 2 assists for 3 points, as Leaf fans would give him a standing ovation when he was named third star of the game, an arena he had many great moments in. Lafleur was getting a warm reception wherever he traveled. It truly captured the respect and adoration he had achieved, and what a great ambassador to the game he really was. He also received a tremendous ovation at Madison Square Garden, as even though he only spent 1 year in New York, they were invested in the story of his comeback that took place 2 seasons earlier. Lafleur missed 14 games at the midway point of the season, but was still healthier than he was the year prior. On December 7, 1990, he received an amazing ovation from fans in Calgary, as long before the Flames arrived in the city, and even as long before the Oilers arrived in the NHL, the Canadiens had quite a following out west, especially Lafleur. And get this, for the 6th and final time in his career, he played in the NHL All-Star Game. He was a special commissioner selection, and he was named to the Wales Conference All-Star team, and the reception he received from fans in Chicago Stadium was one of the loudest of the night. On March 9, 1991, Lafleur played Gretzky for the final time in a game in Quebec, as Wayne paid his respect to the Flower. A week later, he played against the man who looked up to him for many years, Mario Lemieux, for the very last time, and Lemieux would actually go on to win his first Stanley Cup that year. The fans in Pittsburgh knew the influence that the Flower had on their hero, and showed him tremendous respect for it, giving him a very warm reception. The final stretch of the farewell tour did not disappoint, as on March 21, 1981, Lafleur played his last game at Boston Garden, a game best known for Ron Tugnut's 70-save performance. Yes, this was just a regular season game. The Boston faithful gave a tremendous ovation to their old nemesis, yet they had a deep respect for him, much like their former coach Don Cherry did as well, who often sung his praises. Lafleur had an assist in the game as well. A week later on March 28th, Lafleur played his last game in Buffalo, as the Habs and Sabres had developed a pretty good rivalry over the years, and Sabres fans showed their respect. He also had an assist in that game. And what better way to end it? A home-and-home series against the Montreal Canadiens. His final game at the Forum on Saturday, March 30th, drew another huge TV audience, and again tickets were hot. The chants of Guy, Guy, Guy were again echoing through the arena one more time. It didn't matter, he was now playing for their greatest rival. He would always be Montreal's Guy, or Guy. Haha, see what I did there? There was a special pre-game ceremony that included former teammates Ray Jeannot and Yvan Cournoyer. The game itself was tied 2-2 in the second period, and once again, every time Lafleur touched the puck, that cry of Guy echoed through the arena. And on the power play, on the play started by Joe Sakic, he fed Alexei Gusarov, who shot it on goal, but Lafleur was there for the rebound, and he scores his 560th and final goal. And what a place it should be in the Montreal Forum on a great goaltender such as Patrick Waugh. What followed was an epic prolonged standing ovation and more chants of his name. The Habs would go on to win the game 4-3, but as Lafleur skated out the Forum ice for one last time, another standing ovation, one more chant, Guy, Guy, Guy. He left, still their hero. On the very next day, Lafleur would play in his 1126th and very last game. It would actually be at home against the Habs, and received an amazing, adoring reception from the Quebec faithful as they bid au revoir to a man who became their hero as well. The Nords only won 16 games, so playoffs were out of the question. Lafleur played 59 games and mustered up 12 goals and 16 assists for 28 points. And he clicked extremely well with the man who was going to lead this team and finally bring them to success that they've been longing for going forward, Joe Sakic, who has done 7 of Guy's 12 goals, more than half. Also, out of 16 of Lafleur's assists, 7 went to Sakic, nearly half. He collaborated well and had good chemistry with defensive forward Tony Herkak as well, combining with 4 assists. Statistically, it was not a great year, but at least this time he gets to go out on his terms and had a very nice farewell tour, which he deserved, which showed the impact he had on the game, where even fans in arenas that booed him mercilessly for often beating their teams showed their respect. Fitting he scores the final goal of his career in the same arena he scored the majority of them. He got to end his career in his home province with the team that desperately needed guidance, and his 2 seasons there showed how much he truly cared about the game. He knew the task was not going to be as lucrative as it may have been in the past, and if it is true, the fact that he turned down $1 million to go to a prominent Kings team and play alongside the best of all time, well, that just proves it all the more. Lafleur truly wanted to be a leader. This time he stuck to his retirement, despite the fact that the Minnesota North Stars tried to pick him up in the expansion draft, as now he had no regrets, really, and ended his career in a place where he felt comfortable doing so. During his retirement, Lafleur was never too far away from the spotlight. He continued to be a spokesman, doing many commercials, including doing a Molson Dry commercial with Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas playing their infamous Bob and Doug McKenzie characters. He stayed with the Nordiques for a bit behind the scenes, and then later was an ambassador to the Montreal Canadiens. The trademark smile, his generosity to his fans, his status as an icon never changed. He still participated in many charity events, and even when he sold much of his memorabilia, he still donated a large portion to charity. Around 2019, however, Lafleur started encountering numerous health issues and underwent open-heart surgery procedure, a quintuple bypass. Not long after that, he had a cancerous lobe removed from his left lung, but then a year later was diagnosed with cancer in his right lung. On April 22, 2022, Guy Lafleur sadly passed away after his fight with cancer at the age of 70. Tributes galore poured out, showing truly what he meant to hockey fans in his era, even to fans who never got to see him play live. He meant a great deal. Hockey culture in Montreal and all of Quebec, and all across Canada. Lafleur was also given what is called a national funeral, the same send-off which has been given to Habs icons Rocket Richard and Jean Beliveau. These accolades and awards, they're all impressive, but they only tell some of the story. It can't be stated enough what Lafleur meant to the game of hockey, both on the ice and off. But what I will say about these awards is that, once again, it just wasn't his natural talent. It was the heart he put behind it, which helped him win all these things. It was what made him so successful, making sure his communication with his teammates and his coaches were always on point, and going out there every night and giving everything he had. Well, that indeed does it for our look at the one and only Flower, the Blonde Demon, Guy Lafleur. Any other players you would like to see us cover, leave a suggestion in the comments below. In the meantime, please like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, I'll see ya.